How my girlfriend and her sister ruined everything in a single day. It's hard to believe, but it's true. When I met Sarah, everything in my life changed. She wasn't just incredibly beautiful. She had that mysterious charisma that draws people in. Her smile could make you forget all your troubles, and her voice was as gentle as a summer breeze. We had been dating for over 2 years, and I genuinely believed she was my future wife. Every plan I made included her, but I never imagined how one day could destroy everything we had built together. Sarah had a younger sister, Laura. She often visited our apartment, and I had grown used to her presence. She was completely different, more outspoken, sometimes even brazen. Her jokes were borderline inappropriate, and her behavior often made me uncomfortable. However, I always saw her as nothing more than my girlfriend's younger sister. She was part of our lives, and I didn't give it much thought. One Saturday morning, Sarah told me she had errands to run and assured me she'd be back by evening. I stayed home, planning a quiet day watching my favorite shows. But everything changed when Laura decided to drop by. "Sarah said you'd be home alone," she announced as she walked in. Her tone was overly cheerful, and her gaze unusually confident. I offered her a cup of coffee, trying not to pay attention to her revealing outfit. She always dressed that way, but today it seemed more deliberate. We sat in the living room, chatting about trivial things, when she suddenly asked, "Have you ever regretted choosing Sarah over someone else?" Her question caught me off guard. "No, never," I replied, trying to sound firm. Laura just smiled, her gaze becoming even more piercing. She moved closer, and I felt the tension in the room rise. Her presence was no longer casual. It became an oppressive weight that made me feel out of place. "You know, you deserve better," she whispered, leaning in closer. Her words froze me. I tried to put a stop to it, but her confidence was overwhelming, leaving me feeling helpless. Laura was playing with fire, and I didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Sarah. Her eyes instantly turned icy when she saw how close Laura was sitting. "What's going on here?" Her voice was quiet, but there was danger in it. I tried to explain, but it didn't look good. Sarah glanced at Laura, who seemed to be enjoying the tension she had created. "I want an explanation. Now." Her words left me no choice. Sarah stood there with her arms tightly crossed, her gaze cold but filled with pain. Laura, who had been reveling in the chaos just moments ago, suddenly changed her expression. She let out a slow sigh and stepped back, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Okay, I admit it. I went too far," she said, her voice softening, even sounding a bit remorseful. "It was a joke, Sarah. Maybe not the best one, but I didn't think you'd take it so seriously." Sarah looked at her sister with disbelief. Her lips twitched slightly, as if she was struggling to hold back her emotions. "A joke?" Her voice sounded like a hiss. "You think it's funny? Coming onto my boyfriend, acting like you're trying to seduce him, and calling it a joke?" Laura nodded, trying to remain calm. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon. And honestly, I just wanted to see how he'd react, to make sure he really deserves your trust. And you thought this was the way to do it?" Sarah's gaze bore into her sister, unwavering. Laura sighed again. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? It was stupid on my part. I regret making you upset." She glanced at me, as if expecting support. I stayed silent, feeling that anything I said would only make things worse. Sarah slowly dropped her arms, but the tension in the room didn't dissipate. "If you're apologizing, that's fine, but I want to hear the truth from him." She turned to me, her eyes sharp as a blade. "What happened between you two? And don't you dare lie." I felt my palms sweat. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound as confident as possible. "She just went too far. That's all." Sarah stared at me for a few seconds, weighing my words. Then, she abruptly turned to Laura. "Leave," she said curtly. "What?" Laura looked surprised. I said, "Leave. I want to talk to him alone." Laura shrugged, but seemed to decide against arguing. Casting one last quick glance at me, she left the apartment. The door closed, leaving an oppressive silence between Sarah and me. She slowly stepped closer, crossing her arms over her chest. "Why didn't you do anything? Why did you let her act like that?" I didn't know how to react, I admitted. She caught me off guard. Sarah lowered her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. I thought she was crying, but then she lifted her head and looked directly at me. Did you really do nothing? Her voice was soft, but there was a faint hope in it. Nothing, I replied sincerely. Sarah studied me for a long time before suddenly stepping closer. Her hand touched my cheek. Then prove it. Her words were a challenge, but her touch was tender. I felt her hand slide to my neck, pulling me closer. Her lips were warm, and her kiss was more passionate than usual. The atmosphere shifted. The tension began to transform into something else. We both seemed to be trying to forget what had happened. Her touch was gentle yet firm, filled with determination. But at the peak of the moment, she suddenly stopped and stepped back. Her face turned serious again. But why did you let her get so close in the first place? It's your responsibility. Her words felt like a cold shower. I realized the conversation was far from over. Sarah turned away, catching her breath. Her shoulders barely trembled, and I understood she was struggling with her emotions. The room was filled with a heavy silence that seemed to take up all the space. I don't know why I'm reacting this way, she finally said quietly, her voice tinged with despair. Maybe because I don't know. I took a step closer, but she quickly raised her hand to stop me. Wait, give me some time to figure myself out, she said, not looking at me. Sarah, I began, trying to find the right words. You didn't do anything wrong. This was just a strange situation and— You don't understand, she interrupted, turning to face me. Her eyes were glistening with tears, but her gaze was piercing. I've always tried to be strong, confident, someone you can rely on. But inside, she held her breath, as if afraid to say too much. Inside, I feel like I'm not good enough. Her confession took me by surprise. I had never seen Sarah doubt herself. She always seemed so assured in her actions, her choices, in us. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. She sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. You know, when I look at Laura, I see someone I could never be. She's always so confident, so bold. She doesn't have to prove anything. She just takes what she wants, and— Her voice quivered. Sometimes I think you might want someone like her. That's not true, I said firmly, taking another step toward her. Maybe you think that now, she looked at me. But what if one day you look at me and realize you need something more? I didn't know what to say. Her words were so unexpected that I was momentarily lost. Sarah, I chose you, and I will never regret that, I said, trying to sound as genuine as possible. She pondered for a moment, then quietly said, You're saying that now, but I know there's doubt inside you. Sometimes I even think it's my fault, that I haven't given you what you need. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Sarah had always seemed perfect to me, but now I saw her vulnerability. There's no blame here, I said. All I want is you. She stepped closer, her hand gliding into mine. Then why do I feel like something's wrong? Why did I let Laura interfere so easily? Because it's not your fault, I replied, looking straight into her eyes. She softened slightly, but I could tell the doubts still lingered. Maybe it's not about you or Laura. Maybe it's me, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her words struck like a challenge. Her question hung in the air, leaving me without an answer. Sarah sat at the edge of the couch, hugging her arms as if trying to shield herself from the world. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, her shoulders trembling slightly. It was hard to tell if it was from tension or despair. She began, but her voice cracked and she fell silent. I cautiously sat beside her, keeping enough distance to avoid adding to her discomfort. Sarah, I know you're doubting, I said gently, but I want you to know that you mean everything to me. She lifted her head, her eyes filled with doubt. Then why do I feel like it's not enough? I had no answer. Her words seemed to dissolve the air around us, leaving only silence in their wake. Then suddenly, she stood, paced the room, and stopped in front of me. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I just want to feel something real, she said softly, but her voice carried a note of determination. She stepped closer, leaned down, and placed her hands on my shoulders. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching for answers I couldn't give her. "Just let me feel it," she whispered. Her touch was gentle, almost hesitant. She tilted her head, her lips brushing against mine in a kiss that wasn't passionate but uncertain, as if she were trying to figure out if we were still truly together. I kissed her back, wanting to show her she wasn't alone in her emotions. Her arms wrapped around my neck as she leaned in, seeking warmth and reassurance. This was more than a kiss. It was a moment where we both tried to find something real amidst the chaos surrounding us. She pulled away for just a moment to look at me. Her gaze was filled with gratitude and a hint of fear. "I feel safe with you," she said quietly, "but it still doesn't solve what's bothering me." Her words left me deep in thought. I could see her struggling with herself, and I realized this was just the beginning of a much longer conversation. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. Sarah sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring off into the distance. I could see the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her, and I knew that words alone wouldn't help anymore. I stood up, trying to collect my thoughts. Something needed to be done, something more than just talking. Her doubts wouldn't disappear on their own, and I knew that only action would show her how much she meant to me. "Wait here," I said softly. Sarah looked up, her gaze surprised and a bit wary. "Where are you going?" "Trust me," I replied, trying to sound confident, though I was trembling inside. I quickly grabbed my things and left the apartment. The street was quiet, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure if it would work. I headed to a small shop where Sarah and I had once wandered together. It was our special corner, a place where we first laughed over random trinkets. I found the same little item, a silver heart-shaped pendant she had admired back then. I hadn't bought it at the time, but now it seemed like the perfect symbol. When I returned home, I found Sarah still sitting in the same spot. Her eyes were slightly red, and I realized she'd been crying, though she tried to hide it. "What's that?" she asked, noticing the small box in my hand. I sat down beside her and opened the box. The pendant's gleam reflected in her eyes. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She nodded, but her expression was filled with questions. "Back then, I didn't realize how important this was. But now, I want you to know. You are the heart of everything for me. I know you have doubts, and I want this pendant to remind you that I'm always here for you," I said softly. Sarah took the pendant, her fingers trembling slightly. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were something more profound. "Do you really want to show me this through such a gesture?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with skepticism. "No, this is just the beginning," I replied. "I know words mean little right now, but I want to prove to you, with every action, that you're the most important person in my life." I extended my hand, and she placed hers in mine. Her fingers tightened slightly, and I felt that we had taken another step toward finding common ground again. "I know how to show you that you're my priority," I said, looking directly into her eyes. Her gaze softened, and she nodded, though I could see her doubts hadn't entirely disappeared. It was a start, and I was ready to fight for us. The next morning, Sarah seemed calmer. Her eyes no longer carried the tension of the night before, but I could tell she was still wrestling with her emotions. She approached me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, offering a hesitant smile. "I was thinking, maybe tonight we could spend some time together," she said softly, as if afraid I might decline. I nodded immediately, genuinely glad she wanted to take a step forward. "That sounds great. What do you have in mind?" She shrugged slightly, trying to keep the mystery alive. "You'll see. Something simple but meaningful." All day, I felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Evening came, and Sarah invited me to the living room. On the table was a bottle of wine, a few candles, and 2 plates of our favorite pasta that she always prepared with love. "This looks amazing," I said, sitting down beside her. She blushed slightly, her cheeks tinged with a soft pink. "I wanted it to be something that reminds us why we're together." We began dinner, talking about happy memories. Her laughter brought me back to the days when everything felt simpler. It was a beautiful moment, and I started to feel we were moving in the right direction. After dinner, Sarah stood and brought out a small album. "I found this today while looking for the candles," she said, sitting back down. Do you remember this? It was our photo album, filled with pictures we had taken during our time together. Each page held memories of trips, laughter, and even silly moments. We flipped through it, laughing and reminiscing. But then her expression grew serious. She closed the album and set it on the table. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her intently. "What is it?" She sighed nervously, her gaze dropping to the floor. "This isn't easy for me, but I can't keep it inside any longer." My anxiety grew, but I stayed calm, waiting for her to continue. "I'm not sure how you'll react, but you deserve to know the truth," she said, taking a deep breath as if she were about to unearth something deeply buried. Her gaze didn't meet mine, but there was more than sadness in her eyes. It was a struggle she had been fighting within herself. "You know, I often think the problem is with you or with us," she began, nervously intertwining her fingers. "But the truth is, it's not entirely that." I stayed silent, giving her the space to go on. "This started long before you," she whispered. "I was in a relationship that ended terribly." My heart sank. I could sense she was opening up about something deeply personal, and I didn't want to pressure her. "I thought it was love," she continued, finally meeting my eyes. "But he betrayed me. More than once. I found out by accident, but instead of leaving, I stayed. I tried to fight for what we had, but the harder I tried, the more I broke myself." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I felt a deep ache for her pain and a stronger resolve to support her. "Sarah, I'm so sorry you went through that," I said softly. "You didn't deserve any of it." She smiled faintly but sadly. "I know, but it still left scars, ones I've been carrying into every relationship since. I didn't realize how much until now." I reached for her hand, holding it gently. "You're not alone in this. Whatever it takes, we'll work through it together." She nodded, her grip tightening on mine. "I want to believe that," she said quietly. "I really do." That moment felt like a small crack of light breaking through the walls she had built. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step forward, one I was determined to follow through with her. Her voice trembled, and she paused, trying to hold back tears. I gently took her hand, trying to show her that I was there for her. "Sarah, I'm not him." She smiled, but it was a weak smile. "I know, but sometimes I look at you and think, what if it all happens again? What if I end up alone again when I think everything is fine?" The words stuck in my throat. I knew she had reasons for her fears, but I hadn't realized they ran so deep. "When I found out Laura was trying to test you, I was angry with her, but a part of me was grateful, because it meant she cared about me, even if her methods were terrible." Her confession was heavy, but it revealed what I had suspected. She was battling the shadows of her past, which were poisoning our present. "Sarah, I know your past was hard, but you have to understand, I'm here for you. I don't want you to feel alone or to doubt us." She nodded, but her eyes remained sad. "I can't just forget about it. It's like a scar that always reminds you that you're not who you want to be." I gently lifted her hand to my lips and kissed it. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself." She smiled again, this time a little more sincerely. "I need your patience to learn to trust." I nodded, understanding that a challenging journey lay ahead, but I was ready to fight for us. Sarah was worth every effort. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a pillow tightly. She looked nervous, as if something was tormenting her, but she couldn't find the words to begin. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting beside her. She gripped the pillow even tighter. It's hard to explain," she said weakly. "Try," I said, placing a hand on her shoulder to encourage her. Sarah took a deep breath, as though preparing for something difficult. "Do you remember I told you my past left its marks?" she asked, not looking at me. "Yes," I replied, sensing that she was approaching something important. "One of the reasons I've become so cautious isn't just the betrayal I went through. It's also the people who were part of my life and whom I've tried to leave behind." Her voice became more confident, but there was still noticeable tension in it. I stayed silent, allowing her to continue. "One of them, my ex, Jack, he was part of my life longer than he should have been. It was a complicated relationship, and he always knew how to keep me on edge. Even after we broke up, he wouldn't leave me alone. I noticed her fingers start to tremble. And now he's trying to come back? I guessed, though I feared hearing confirmation. She nodded, lowering her head. Yes. He messaged me a few days ago. He said he wanted to see me, that he needed to talk. Did you reply to him? I asked, trying to keep my emotions in check. She shook her head sharply. No, of course not. But that hasn't stopped him. He messaged me again, then called. I don't know how to make it stop. I felt anger boiling inside me. I didn't know Jack, but I already hated him for making Sarah feel so helpless. Did you tell him you're in a relationship? I asked. I haven't even opened his messages, she admitted. But he knows. He knows I'm with you. My thoughts were chaotic as I tried to figure out how to handle the situation. Sarah, I won't let him interfere in our lives. We'll stop this. She looked at me with hope in her eyes. But how? I'm afraid that if I respond, it'll only encourage him. And if I ignore him, he'll find another way. I saw fear in her eyes. It wasn't just fear of Jack, but also fear that her past might destroy what we were building together. We'll find a solution, I assured her, pulling her into a hug. But you need to know that I'm here, and I won't let him ruin what we have. Sarah sighed, relaxing slightly in my embrace. I trust you, she said softly, but I'm still scared. We'll get through this together, I promised, understanding the challenging road ahead of us. Sarah remained quiet after our conversation about Jack. Her gaze was pensive, and her movements were cautious, as if she were afraid of triggering another wave of emotions. I tried not to pressure her, giving her space to process everything, though internally, I was boiling with concern. Over the next few days, her behavior shifted. She became more focused but also more distant. I thought it was her way of coping and decided to give her time. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, Sarah approached me suddenly. Listen, she began, avoiding my eyes. I'll be busy today. I have some errands to run. Okay, I said, trying to sound casual, though her tone made me wary. Anything important? You could say that, she replied, still avoiding direct eye contact. I sensed something was off, but chose not to press her. After our recent conversation, I understood she needed space, and I didn't want to create unnecessary tension. That day, I was busy with work and didn't dwell too much on her words. But when I returned home in the evening, I noticed she wasn't there. The apartment was dark, and I hadn't received any messages from her. The clock read 9 p.m. when the door finally opened. Sarah walked in, looking slightly disoriented and tired. Hi, she said quietly, not meeting my gaze. Where have you been? I asked, trying to keep my worry in check. She set her bag down and sat on the couch, nervously gripping the edge of her sweater. I met with Jack, she finally said. Her words exploded in the room like a bomb. My reaction was immediate. You did what? I met with him, she repeated, finally looking up at me. Her expression was a mix of guilt and determination. I wanted it to end. My emotions collided, anger, confusion, fear. And you decided not to tell me about it? Because I knew you'd be against it, she admitted. But I had to do it. I ran a hand over my face, trying to calm down. What did he say? I asked. He wants me back, she said bluntly. He told me he made a mistake losing me, and now he wants to fix everything. And what did you tell him? Sarah took a deep breath and looked at me with sadness in her eyes. I told him it's impossible, that I'm with you, and I don't want to change anything. I exhaled in relief, but doubts still lingered. Then why do you look like you're not sure about it? She lowered her head again. Because part of me is afraid he won't leave me alone. I know how persistent he can be. I sat beside her, gently taking her hand. We'll deal with this, together. But next time, if you decide to do something like this, I want to know about it. She nodded, squeezing my hand. I promise. Just understand. I wanted it to be over. But now it feels like it's only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up earlier than Sarah. She seemed peaceful in her sleep, but I couldn't shake off our conversation about Jack. Her words felt genuine, but the thought of him reappearing in her life gnawed at me. A knock on the door shattered the morning silence. Surprised, I went to answer, not expecting anyone. On the doorstep stood a courier with a large box wrapped in a golden bow. "This is for Sarah," the man said, handing me the package. I took it mechanically and closed the door. The box had no markings, only our apartment address. A thought immediately flashed through my mind. Jack? Sarah woke up as I placed the box on the kitchen table. She looked groggy, but her expression quickly changed when she saw the package. "What's that?" she asked, looking at me in confusion. "It's for you," I replied, keeping my emotions in check. She approached and touched the box, as if trying to figure out what was inside. "I didn't order anything," she said, but there was something else in her voice, a hint of unease. "Open it." I gestured toward the box. Hesitantly, Sarah pulled the ribbon and removed the lid. Inside was a large, luxurious vase with gold detailing. It looked like something chosen specifically for her. This is from Jack, isn't it?" I asked, unable to hide my tension. Sarah stayed silent, staring at the vase, before finding a small card inside. She read it and, without saying a word, handed it to me. The card read, "I always knew you deserved the best. Jack." "You need to explain this," I said, feeling anger begin to rise. Sarah looked up, her face filled with confusion. "I didn't ask for this. I don't even know how he got my address." "But it happened," I replied. "He knows where you live and is sending you gifts like you're still together." "Do you think I wanted this?" Her voice trembled. "I don't know how he found me. I haven't even opened his messages." I stepped closer, trying to keep my composure. "Then why won't he stop? Why does he keep doing this?" Sarah looked at me, pain evident in her eyes. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Maybe because I once made him believe he mattered to me. But that was a long time ago." I stepped back, trying to process everything. The vase stood between us like a symbol of something we both wanted to leave in the past. "We need to do something about this," I said. "But what?" Her voice was filled with hopelessness. "How do you stop someone who simply refuses to stop?" I realized there was no simple answer to her question. After discussing the situation with Sarah, I knew I couldn't leave this burden on her shoulders any longer. Jack had already crossed the line, and his behavior was becoming unacceptable. The next morning, while Sarah was in the shower, I took her phone and quickly found his number in the blocked contacts list. Inside, I was boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. Acting on emotions would only make things worse. "Hello," came a voice on the other end. It was confident, even a little smug. "It's me," I said firmly. "Sarah's boyfriend?" Jack was silent for a second, then chuckled. "Well, I figured you'd call eventually," he said. "All right, I'm listening." I took a deep breath, suppressing my anger. "Listen, Jack. What you're doing is unacceptable. Sarah has made it clear that she doesn't want anything to do with you. You need to leave her alone." His laughter turned into a more serious tone. "And you think you can just step in and dictate the rules to me?" His voice grew cold. "Sarah and I had something real, and I know she hasn't forgotten it." "That's in the past," I replied firmly. "She's with me, and I won't let you ruin our life." "Oh, she told you that?" Jack's tone was sarcastic. "Did she also tell you about the moments we shared? About how she promised to always be there for me?" I felt anger bubbling inside, but tried to stay composed. "I know enough to understand that you're manipulating her," I said. "And your words won't sway me." Jack went silent, but I could feel him searching for a way to respond. "You think you've won, huh?" he finally said. "But let me give you some advice. Don't be so sure of yourself. Sarah is an amazing woman, but her heart has always been complicated. You have no idea what she's capable of when she feels threatened." "That sounds like a threat," I replied, feeling the tension rise. "It's just a fact," Jack said, and I could almost feel the smug smile in his voice. "But don't worry, we'll see how things turn out." I wanted to say something sharp in return, but the line went dead. Jack had hung up. My heart was racing, and his words kept echoing in my head. What did he mean? Had Sarah really not told me something important? When Sarah came out of the bathroom, I was standing by the window, trying to calm myself. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the tension on my face. I turned to her. "I spoke to Jack." Her expression changed instantly. What did he say? He said there were things between you two that I don't know about. Sarah sighed, her eyes filling with unease. There are things I've tried to leave in the past, she said softly, but maybe you deserve to know about them. The tension between Sarah and me was already palpable when we were unexpectedly interrupted by Laura. Her usual bold and confident demeanor seemed even more provocative this time. She didn't wait for an invitation. She just opened the door and walked in, as she always did, without warning. "So, what's the news from the front?" she asked, flopping onto the couch and crossing her legs casually. Sarah, who had been silently sitting at the kitchen table, snapped her head up. "Laura, I don't think now is a good time for your jokes." Her voice was tired but restrained. "Oh, don't worry. I'm not here to joke," Laura replied with a smile that promised nothing good. "What do you want?" I interjected, trying to stay calm. Laura raised her eyebrows as if surprised by my tone. "I want to help. I know you've got a little Jack problem." "This isn't your business," Sarah replied, her voice starting to tremble. "Oh, Sarah, stop. We all know it's not just about you. It's affecting both of you, and it seems like you're not handling it very well," Laura said, glancing in my direction. I saw Sarah's face pale. "Laura, you don't even know all the details," she said, gripping the edge of the table. "Oh, but I do," Laura said smugly. "I've already talked to Jack." Her words hit the room like a thunderclap. "What?" Sarah and I exclaimed simultaneously. Laura shrugged as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, I met with him, just to figure out what he wants and why he's acting this way." "You didn't think to tell me about this?" Sarah stood up, her voice cracking with emotion. "You'd only worry and do nothing," Laura replied. "I wanted to take matters into my own hands." I felt anger boiling inside me. "Laura, that was a huge mistake," I said. "Jack is a manipulator. He's just waiting for one of us to slip up." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Laura dismissed me with a wave. "He wants to talk to Sarah again. I think that'll solve the problem." "You don't understand who you're dealing with," Sarah interjected, her voice nearly breaking. Laura stood and stepped closer to us. "Maybe I know how to fix this, but you're not going to like it," she said, looking directly at me. Her words sounded like a challenge, and I realized the situation had just gotten more complicated. Laura couldn't resist the temptation to dig deeper into Jack. Her curiosity mixed with a desire to prove to Sarah that she could control the situation. She decided to meet with him again, this time without warning. Jack was waiting at a small cafe, seated by the window. His demeanor was confident, almost cocky, like someone who believed he was winning the game. When Laura walked in, his eyes lit up with satisfaction. "I knew you'd come back," he said as she sat down across from him. "I'm not here to support you," Laura said coldly, though curiosity flickered in her eyes. Jack smiled, leaning in closer. "Of course not. You're just here to understand what's going on and figure out how it might benefit you." "Benefit me?" Laura raised an eyebrow. "What makes you so confident?" "Because I see how you look at him," Jack said, his voice laced with manipulation. "You're not as selfless as you pretend to be." Laura fell silent. His words hit a nerve she was afraid to acknowledge herself. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, keeping her face neutral. "Just think about it," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "If you really want to help your sister, you'll be on my side. I just want to take back what's mine." "Sarah is not your property," Laura snapped. "But she was," Jack said, his gaze turning serious. "And a part of her still is." Laura hesitated. She had always felt there was something special between Sarah and the man she now called her boyfriend, but that thought had always filled her with envy. "Why do you think I would help you?" she finally asked. "Because you want to see it all fall apart," Jack said bluntly. "You want to prove she's not as perfect as everyone thinks." Laura didn't respond. Her silence was all the confirmation Jack needed that he was hitting the right chords. "Think about it," Jack said, standing up. "You could be the hero of this story if you wanted to." He left, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts. When Laura returned home, Sarah immediately noticed something was wrong. "Where were you?" Sarah asked, trying to gauge her sister's strange demeanor. "Just out for a walk," Laura replied, attempting to sound casual. But her behavior was far too suspicious. Sarah began to question her sister's motives, and I noticed the tension between them only grew. The next morning, Laura spoke to me alone. "I might know how to fix this," she said, stopping me at the door. "But you're not going to like it." The situation with Jack, already tense, escalated further when Laura received a message from him. At first glance, it seemed harmless, but its content was crafted to sow doubt. "Laura, you've always known Sarah isn't who she pretends to be. Want me to tell you the whole truth about her?" Laura stared at her phone screen for a long time, unsure how to react. She had always had a strained relationship with her sister, but this text made her wonder. Was Sarah really hiding something? Trying to uncover the truth, Laura agreed to meet with Jack. He chose a neutral place, a park where they could talk without prying eyes. "So, you decided to show up after all," Jack greeted her with a sly smile. "Talk quickly, I don't have much time," Laura replied sharply, trying to appear indifferent. Jack pulled out his phone and showed her several old photos of him and Sarah together. They looked happy, but one photo in particular caught Laura's attention. In it, Sarah stood next to another man while Jack had his arm around her shoulder. "This was a few weeks before she told me she loved me," Jack explained. "Now think about it. If she could lie to me like that, what's stopping her from doing the same to you and your precious boyfriend?" Laura felt her doubts begin to take root. She had always known Sarah had her secrets, but she hadn't thought they could be this serious. When Laura returned home, her face reflected a storm of emotions. Sarah was sitting on the couch flipping through a magazine, but immediately noticed the tension in her sister's eyes. "Where were you?" Sarah asked, trying to hide her nervousness. "You tell me," Laura replied, tossing her bag onto the table. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sarah looked up, confused. "It means maybe you're not as honest as you pretend to be," Laura said, locking eyes with her sister. "Laura, if you have something to say, just say it," Sarah replied, her voice tense. Laura stepped closer, holding her phone in her hand. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this man?" Laura asked, showing the photo Jack had sent. Sarah froze. Her expression shifted, but she quickly regained her composure. "It's an old photo. It doesn't mean anything," she replied. "Nothing?" Laura snapped, anger flaring in her voice. Sarah sat on the couch, her face pale and her hands clutching the edge of her sweater tightly. She couldn't look away from the photo Laura held. The silence in the room was heavy. "Fine," Sarah finally said, her voice quiet and restrained. "I'll tell you about it." Laura crossed her arms over her chest, waiting for an explanation. "It was Tom," Sarah began. "He was a friend of Jack's. We met at one of their parties." "A friend of Jack's?" Laura raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "No," Sarah said. "Things were complicated back then. My relationship with Jack was already falling apart, but he kept throwing parties, acting like nothing was wrong." Sarah lowered her gaze, as though remembering those events was painful. "Tom was different," she said. "He was attentive. He always listened to me when Jack ignored me. At first, we just talked, but over time, you started to feel something for him?" Laura interrupted, her tone laced with irony. "It wasn't as simple as you think," Sarah snapped. "I felt lonely, lost. Tom was the only one who tried to understand me." "And what happened?" Laura pressed, her lips tightening. "We spent one evening together," Sarah admitted. "We walked around the city, talked. He told me I deserved better than what Jack was giving me." Laura stared at her sister, as if searching for lies in her words. "But it was just one night," Sarah added. "I never cheated on Jack. That night made me realize I couldn't stay with him if he wasn't going to change." "And you think that justifies everything?" Laura asked. "Tom was his friend." Sarah sighed. "I'm not proud of it," she said. "But that was before I met him," she gestured toward me. "It's a part of my past that I've tried to leave behind." "And does Jack know about this?" Laura leaned forward. "I think he does," Sarah said. "It's another reason he can't let go of me." Laura paused, then tossed the photo onto the table. "You know, Sarah, sometimes I think you live in a world where everyone is supposed to forgive your mistakes," Laura said. "And you?" Sarah shot back. "Have you always been perfect?" The sisters stared at each other, the tension between them mounting. I stood nearby, unsure if I could step in to diffuse the conflict. Now you know the truth, Sarah said, looking at Laura. If you want, you can use it against me. I haven't decided yet, Laura replied before leaving the room. Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with sorrow. Now you know everything, she said, and I'm afraid it will change everything. Laura never backed down when she believed she was right. She sat in the living room, holding her phone, contemplating how to best use what she had learned. Her understanding of the truth about Sarah's past was mixed with jealousy and a desire to prove she could control the situation. She decided that I needed to know everything. The next day, while Sarah was out shopping, Laura approached me, full of determination. We need to talk, she said, sitting across from me. What's going on? I asked, sensing something was wrong. Laura pulled out her phone and opened the photo Jack had sent her earlier. Did you know about this? She asked, showing me the picture of Sarah with another man. My heart stopped. What is this? I took the phone and stared intently at the image. That was back when she was with Jack, Laura explained. But does it even matter? Did she tell you about it? I stayed silent, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. She said it didn't mean anything, Laura continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But you know how she's so good at covering up her mistakes. Why are you showing me this? I asked, feeling a wave of anger rise in my chest. Because you deserve to know the truth, Laura replied. Sarah has never been honest. She manipulates everyone, including you. Her words cut deeper with each passing second. Doubts began to creep into my mind, and questions about whether I truly knew Sarah started to take over my thoughts. When Sarah came home, she immediately sensed the tension in the room. What's going on? She asked, looking between me and Laura. I showed her the phone with the photo. Explain this, I said coldly. Sarah froze, her eyes widening. You talked to Jack? She asked, looking at Laura. Of course, Laura replied, crossing her arms. Someone had to. How could you? Sarah stepped closer, her voice trembling with anger. This is my past, Laura. It's none of your business. But it is his, Laura said, gesturing toward me. And you know it. Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with pain. That was a long time ago. I've already told you about this. Why are you doubting me now? Because you never told me the whole truth, I replied, struggling to keep my emotions in check. If it didn't mean anything, why is Jack using it against you? Sarah lowered her head, as if searching for the right words. Because he doesn't want to let me go, she finally said. And it seems Laura is helping him. Oh, don't put this on me, Laura snapped. Maybe you should take a look at yourself. The tension in the room was unbearable. I felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff. Enough, I said, raising my hand. I'm tired of these games. I looked at Sarah. I need time to think this through. What about me? Sarah asked, her voice full of desperation. If you want me to trust you, I said, you need to be willing to tell me everything. Sarah nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Laura sighed and smirked disdainfully. Well, whatever. I did what I had to do, she said before leaving the room. I was left alone with my thoughts, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely lost in this situation. Was Laura really acting with good intentions, or did her interference have hidden motives?